Hey everyone, my name's Giselle, and today I'm talking about depression. What it actually is, how it affects Australians, the main risk factors, how it's treated, and how trauma plays a big role in it all. I'll also finish with a little reflection on what I've learned throughout SNUG206 and how it's changed the way I view mental health care. So, let's start simple. What is depression? Depression, or major depressive disorder, MDD, is a mood disorder that goes way beyond just feeling sad. It's defined as having a persistent low mood or loss of interest or pleasure in usual activities for at least 2 weeks, along with other symptoms like fatigue, changes in sleep or appetite, difficulty concentrating, feelings of worthlessness, or even suicidal thoughts. Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists 2020. It's not something that you can just snap out of. It impacts how people think, feel, and function in everyday life, from their motivation to work or study to how they connect with others. Basically, it's one of the most disabling yet misunderstood mental health conditions out there. Now, in Australia, depression is unfortunately really common, and what's even more worrying is that it's affecting people younger and younger every year. According to the National Study of Mental Health and Wellbeing 2020 to 2022, around 43% of Australians aged 16 to 85 have experienced a mental disorder at some point in their life, and about 1 in 5 have experienced one in just the last 12 months. Australian Bureau of Statistics 2023. When we zoom in on those numbers, mood disorders like depression make up a large part of that group. The data also shows that women are more likely than men to experience depression, often because they juggle multiple social and caregiving roles, and hormonal and reproductive factors can play a part too, ABS 2023. But rates in men are often underreported, which tells us stigma is still a huge barrier. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare 2024 estimates that depressive disorders alone account for around 3% of Australia's total burden of disease. That's millions of people affected every single day. Depression contributes not only to personal suffering, but also to a loss of productivity, increased physical health issues, and even mortality through suicide. Something that really stands out is how depression impacts different groups. Young adults between 16 and 24 are one of the most affected age groups, which makes sense considering how many life transitions, identity pressures, and financial stresses they face. For people in rural or remote communities, access to mental health services can be limited, and the isolation makes symptoms worse. AIHW 2024. And even though there's support from GPs, psychologists, or helplines like Lifeline and Beyond Blue, many Australians still delay seeking help because of stigma, fear of judgment, or simply not recognising the signs early enough. That tells us that public education and open conversations around mental health are still just as important as treatment itself. Why depression happens and the risk factors. Depression doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It is usually the result of a mix of factors that build up over time. We look at it through the biopsychosocial model, which means biological, psychological, and social influences all come together. Biological factors include things like having a family history of depression, differences in brain chemistry, especially involving neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, and even hormonal changes, such as those related to the thyroid, menstruation, pregnancy, or menopause, RAN-ZCP 2020. There's also evidence that chronic stress physically changes the brain structures like the hippocampus, which affects memory and emotional regulation. Then there are psychological factors. People with a tendency towards perfectionism, self-criticism, or negative thought patterns are more vulnerable. It is those who internalize blame, people who think everything is my fault or nothing will change, who often fall into what's called a cognitive triad of depression. Negative views of self, the world, and the future. Parker 2020. Social factors are also massive. Things like unemployment, financial stress, discrimination, housing insecurity, or feeling disconnected from your community can all trigger or worsen depression. After the pandemic, for example, there was a noticeable increase in depressive symptoms, especially among younger Australians dealing with the uncertainty about work, study, and social connection. Australian Institute of Health and Welfare 2024. And then there is trauma, probably one of the biggest underlying contributors. People who have experienced early life trauma or ongoing abuse are far more likely to develop depression later on. Trauma literally changes the way the brain and body handle stress, and I'll explain that link a bit deeper soon. Depression treatment options. When it comes to treatment, there is no single magic fix, but there's a really strong evidence base for what works best. The RAN-ZCP Mood Disorders Guideline 2020 sets out the standard of care for Australia, and the key idea is that treatment should be tailored, combining different approaches depending on severity and personal needs. Let's start with the medication. Antidepressants are one of the most common treatments for moderate to severe depression. The main classes are SSRIs, SNRIs, and sometimes tricyclics or atypical antidepressants. They work by helping regulate neurotransmitters that affect mood and motivation. The pros are very clear. They're accessible, evidence-based, and for many people, life-saving. They can help lift that heavy fog enough for someone to start engaging with therapy and daily life again. But the cons include side effects, things like nausea, weight change, insomnia, and sexual dysfunction, and the fact that they usually take a few weeks to work. RANZCP 2020. Then there is psychological therapy, which is equally, if not more important. Cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on recognizing and reframing negative thought patterns. Interpersonal therapy looks at how relationship issues, grief, or life changes contribute to mood. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy teaches people to stay grounded and prevent relapse. The amazing part about therapy is that it empowers people with long-term tools, but access can still be an issue, especially with long wait lists, limited Medicare sessions, and the cost barrier. Finally, we can't forget holistic and lifestyle approaches. Regular exercise, a balanced diet, consistent sleep, time outdoors, social connection, and reducing alcohol or drug use all play a huge role in maintaining recovery. These might seem simple, but evidence shows they genuinely reduce depressive symptoms and improve overall well-being. Australian Institute of Health and Welfare 2024. For many Australians, the best outcomes come from combining these treatments: medication for stability, therapy for insight, and lifestyle habits for resilience. Trauma and depression. This part is probably the most important to talk about because it connects so many dots. Trauma and depression are deeply intertwined. People who experience trauma, especially during childhood, are much more likely to develop depression later in life. Trauma changes how the brain processes stress through something called the HPA axis, which controls our stress hormones like cortisol. RANZCP 2020. When that system is overactivated for long periods, the brain starts responding as if danger never ends, even when the person is safe. Trauma can also lead to powerful negative beliefs, like I'm not safe, I'm unlovable, or I can't trust anyone. Over time, these beliefs feed the hopelessness that defines depression. It is also extremely common for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, to have co-occurring depression. They overlap so much that if trauma isn't addressed, the depression often won't fully improve. That's why the Phoenix Australia PTSD Guidelines 2022 recommend trauma-focused therapies like trauma-focused CBT or EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing. They help reprocess traumatic memories safely so they no longer trigger that same emotional shutdown. This is where trauma-informed care comes in. It's not a specific treatment, but an approach, making sure people feel safe, respected, and in control. It's understanding that their symptoms are often protective responses from the past, not personal failings. When care is trauma-informed, it reduces shame and increases trust. And that can make all the difference in someone's recovery. So, to wrap everything up, depression is one of the most common and complex mental health conditions in Australia. It's not just about sadness or a chemical imbalance, it's about how a person's biology, psychology, environment, and experiences all interact. It can absolutely affect anyone, but with the right mix of medication, therapy, lifestyle change, and compassion, recovery is absolutely possible. Through SNUG206, I've learned that mental health nursing isn't just about recognizing symptoms or giving medication. It's about truly understanding the person behind the illness. We watch real stories from people living with depression, and those videos really stuck with me. Hearing how they described the heaviness and isolation helped me to see how much empathy matters in nursing. One of the biggest lessons was how to be an active listener. Not interrupting, not rushing it, but being fully present. Even saying something simple like, "That sounds really hard," can make someone feel safe and heard. We also focused on therapeutic communication, using warmth, open body language, and non-judgmental language to build trust. SNUG206 helped me connect how trauma, stress, and social factors all influence depression. It reminded me that behind every diagnosis there's a story, someone who's been shaped by what they've lived through. For this subject, I thought depression was mostly emotional, but now I see it as something deeply human, something that touches every part of a person's life. As a future nurse, I want to carry that understanding forward, to approach people with empathy, listen without judgment, and create a space where they feel valued and understood. Thank you so much for listening.